Thank you so much, Rector, Principals, Deputy Mayor, former Mayor and now colleague in the European institutions, professors, students. Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for having me here. I studied law, and I did my master on political science and constitutional law, so I feel a little bit back home, but in Florence. And now, even if I was a professor in a school of law in Madrid, I don't remember anymore how to do that. I'm a practitioner on a daily basis. But I guess that when you step in these schools, you feel the pressure. You have the pressure of history of Florence, discovering and crafting in a such deep manner our civilization, and you feel the pressure of having so many relevant people being aggregated in these schools and contributing so much to the buildings of a well-functioning democracy, both at the national level and in Europe. So what I thought was that it was more important to ensure that we had time to pay attention to your comments, because I think it is very important and very interesting to hear from you. What are your comments, concerns, observations, and to open this dialogue. And in order to ensure that we can do so, I will make some preliminary comments myself, so that I can provoke a little bit some of the ideas, to explain a little bit where I think we are, and to share with you some of the concerns that I also have on what I see and what I experience on my day-to-day work. And I was thinking on what the world would look like back in 2015, so not 40 or whatever years ago, that I share your very same feeling when we entered into the School of Law. In those days, European law was a kind of small thing about institutions and small things about general principles in the law system, but not so much. Yes, there were a few things and some studies on the treaties and so on, but not so much. And now it is not anymore the case. It is much more complicated. It is much more difficult to differentiate between the different pieces and relations between international law, European law, and national law. So I think that this is quite an interesting process to come into a much more interconnected world, but it also shows to what extent we are experiencing this type of challenges against the rule of law, whatever law. And it came somehow in an unexpected manner. How it can be that having built so much for such a long time, now we have these very open conversations and people saying things that we had never thought that were going to be expressed in loud voice, in the media, in the public institutions. Because it has taken quite a huge effort to build a system that it is not perfect, but tries to deliver on some of the very relevant aspects of the day-to-day life of every single citizen, every single society, every single country, related to the rest of the countries, related to the system, thinking on how we can improve the governance to allow everybody to take its capacity forward, or a place to ensure that everybody can be heard and that discussions can drive into something that could be supported and owned by everybody. And then I was thinking on back in 2015, as I was saying, 2015, we thought that everything was solved. We were overcoming a horrible crisis here in Europe that had a terrible impact on the citizens, but had a terrible impact in the global, regional, and national economies, which I said it was conceived as this cannot happen again, how we can build strengths to avoid this happening again. We were optimistic. so optimistic that we managed to get everybody on board, all the nations on board, to support what I would call the agenda of the future, how to build a much more fair and sustainable future. The Sustainable Development Goals, how to cooperate to prevent and develop early warning systems in case the catastrophes could impact on the societies and the population, the Paris Agreement on how to cooperate and tackle climate change challenge, even how to get peace and to ensure nuclear security in Iran. We had the conviction that our European values could help into this process. We had the conviction that we need to manage a little bit the globalization process because we needed to rebalance global and local, so to ensure that the impacts on the micro life of the day-to-day people or the small business or the small farmers could be also taken into consideration to avoid weakness because of the big picture and the global figures without paying attention to the very small things. We were happy, optimistic. We were wondering ourselves, what next? What we can do? And look what it is happening around us 10 years later. Challenging the very relevant role and data being provided by the science, the observation, challenging the importance of knowledge being taken into consideration to take decisions, challenging the rules. And when I say the rules, I come back to the course on international law. You can get the first chapter, the second chapter, the third chapter, so that the UN Charter, the humanitarian law, the rule of the world, the sovereignty of the nations, the respect to the law and the contract, everything is being challenged. And at the very same time, we in the Western world that consider that ourselves were sound enough and we were used to be the ones to shape the offer, the demand, the rules, the capacity to come to support others, but taking into consideration that we were strong enough to come up with solutions, discover that, happily, the rest of the world has also managed to develop solutions to provide a better future for the societies. But they may be organized in a different manner that may have an impact in the global supply chains, that may be used in such a way that does not necessarily comply with our own understanding of what it means, the international law and respect. So we see that everything is much more interconnected, everything is much smaller than what we could think 50 years ago. This is not anymore something that happens far away and does not have an impact on us, but we don't have the tools to manage the right answers. So, yes, we say, oh, okay, but what do? We Europeans, we defend ourselves, we forget about the rest of the world. What do we do when we thought that the peace dividend could prevent any type of aggression? And we realized that this is not the case, and that even the raw materials are weaponized, so to create pressure and to show our weakness. What do we do when we realize that there are others that are leading some of the most promising technology developments and are not based in Europe? What do we do when we find that our traditional big partner, so to ensure the creation of this global governance system, so to provide some security elements for the world, including us Europeans, to develop the economy, the creation of wealth, to develop the trade, comes unilaterally to say that he's not going to pay attention to any of those things? and that he's going to impose whatever he considers that may be relevant for them, even if he may be wrong. But he challenges everything. So we have technology challenges, challenges around peace and security, challenges around the impact of our neighbors 15 kilometers away from my country, being the youngest continent with more than 70% of the population below 35 years old and with not much clarity on how they could earn their lives. What we can do when we have this type of pressures coming from abroad on our own society, and we feel that even with our tools we cannot manage to develop the right answers. And then, yes, I think that one of the most important lines to answer this question is, hey, we are not 27 individuals. We should be one big player. We can join forces. We count on very relevant strengths in terms of human capacities, technical capacities, infrastructures, accumulated savings, a very relevant single market that still lacks the use of its whole potential in many aspects. This was why when two very relevant Italians, one of them coming from this very same university, came last year to say, yes, the world may be very complicated, but let's think what we can do on our own, because if we take the full potential of what we do on our own, we may have adequate answers, at least to a large extent, to be able to strengthen our resilience when thinking in these challenges, both external and domestically. We may get some additional strength in our external policies, and we certainly will get a much more sound response to what we consider the basis of the European project, a social market economy that takes into consideration values, people, well-functioning economy, but also the size of the economy, that to a certain extent is able to play on this single market to create value and to provide good responses to the people. So it has been a very complicated year and a much more complicated summer. And we've seen all these elements coming up. How difficult is to identify how we stay strong to defend the UN Charter, the sovereignty of a neighbor against the use of the force, how we can handle things in a coherent manner when we witness what it is happening in Gaza, of course condemning the terrorism, of course asking for the release of the hostages, but even though remembering the international law for a state that is democratic, how we can play in such a way that we stay strong when the economy, the trade is being weaponized, how we can do to dive into the European potential when thinking in the domestic European regulation to develop the possibilities of the different unions that are still there, or to use the green agenda as the main agenda to drive and to ensure the competitiveness of our industries without missing jobs, but on the contrary, creating jobs and facilitating that we have the possibility to ensure the long-lasting prosperity and the creation of wealth for our citizens, but also to keep on building a much more equal relationship with other countries. So all of this is more or less where we are, which is not easy. But as I said, I think that the most important message is that if we are able to stick to our values and to update the tools, we may find the right solutions. If we break the principles and stick to the old manner to understand the tools, we may get old-fashioned, so not able to respond to these challenges. And in that precise moment where we need to build this update in almost all over our policies, there is something which is very important. How people understand, support, or on the contrary, disregard the type of solutions, and this means understanding what we are doing, assessing, and trying to be sufficiently humble to pay attention to all the concerns, but to be very honest in explaining the whys and the whats, and how we can identify the ideas to keep on building for the time to come. And of course, sticking to the rule of law is still underscoring the importance to count on a common system that makes us predictable and stable. So also being able to provide that comfort, that trust to anyone willing to invest, to anyone willing to improve, to anyone willing to challenge, but according to the very same set of rules. And we'll see much of this in the coming months, and we'll see how difficult it may be to build consensus in a continent that for the time being is still suffering the shock of having so many things being disrupted in such a short period of time. But we cannot stay in a corner. We need to take the reality as it is and to identify the best ways forward without questioning our own principles and core values. And we'll see. But this is why I appreciate so much being here, and I could be more than happy to get your points, questions, concerns, or criticism so that we can exchange views on how to proceed or how we see things on the very concrete cases that you would like to comment. Thank you so much.